Alright guys, so I couldn't find this in a PDF, and it's not in the Internet Archive, so instead I just have to read the book itself. And I didn't buy the digital version of this book, so the topic here is basically more necropolitics towards Africa, as I had already read earlier in another video. Okay. Few regions are completely free of malaria, but the disease has something akin to a stranglehold on Africa. Oh, by the way, heads up if you plan on reading this book, unfortunately, the author is a Catholic, so take that with what you will. Okay, of the 1 million malaria deaths each year, 75% of African children are to the age of 5. The drag on Africa's already faltering economies is substantial. To direct expenditures for treatment and prevention must be added an indirect cost of productivity lost, who estimated Africa's losses to the GDP at US 12 billion every year. But even this seems low, given the huge numbers infected and utterly debilitating nature of the disease. It is a short-sighted parasite that kills its host. The vast majority of malarial victims survive, unlike their HIV counterparts. Even if their infection is left untreated, children in Africa who have survived bouts of infection are said to be, quote, immune from the disease once those reach the age of 5. But their so-called immunity should not be taken to mean, as it customarily does, that their bodies have developed such a resistance to the malaria sporozoites that these can never again mount a successful invasion. Rather, it means their body has surrendered to the parasite in return for its promise not to kill them, at least not directly. Being immune from malaria in Africa actually means that you are anything but. You will be regularly assaulted by the disease for the rest of your life, each time left alive enough to recover and play host for the next parasitical round, as long as your weakened state does not cause you to die from something else first. Every malarial attack means hundreds of thousands of parasites sucking as much as a quarter pound of hemoglobin out of your blood blood cells in a matter of hours, killing them in the process. In Africa, this would be the equivalent of a very significant blood donation. But malaria, unlike the local blood bank of the Red Cross, does no weight, health, or other screening. Everyone, even small children, loses a pint or more of blood whether they can afford or not, and many lose them at such a rate that they are continually anemic. Bernard Nathan, a physician working with malarial patients in Kenya, reports that 1 in 20 children in the villages surrounding his clinics are so anemic that, if their blood were tested in the United States, they would be rushed to a hospital for emergency transfusions. Although numbers are sketchy and hard to come by, the general consensus among epidemiologists and public health officials seems to be that the world's malarial problem is growing worse. One close study of published data found that the malaria across Africa accounts for 40% of fever cases and up to 24% of cases in death, even though only 8 and 25% of Africans with malaria were actually able to go to a doctor for their illness. Malarial cases still accounted for between 25 and 50% of all admissions to African health services. The growth in the number of malaria cases across the continent ranges from a low of 7.9% to a high of 21.0%. In Zambia, cases per 1,000 people have risen 167.5 in 1982 to 355.7 in 1994. In sum, malaria's medical impact is so great in Africa that it negatively affects other aspects of health, including reproductive health. The benefits to be gained from eradicating this pestilence is almost incalculable. One study recently conducted in Gambia suggests, in the words of Ellen Shell, quote, that control of malaria seems to bring about a radical reduction of mortality from all causes. Given that there are literally hundreds of millions of individuals who have been wounded and weakened by the disease, that conclusion seems self-evident. Consider the problem of maternal mortality. There are no relief statistics for the actual number of women dying in a childbirth in the developing world. So let us, just for the sake of argument, accept the perhaps exaggerated estimate of 600,000, sometimes advanced by the family planners. A geographic analysis of the mortality distribution suggests that more than a third of those deaths can be attributed to the complications from malaria, particularly among women entering pregnancy already anemic. This means that if malaria were eradicated, 200,000 fewer women would die in childbirth each year, compared with the great life-saving project. The claim of the family planners that their anti-pregnancy programs reduce maternal mortality by roughly 4,000 for every 100 million they spend fails to impress. Then there is a problem of low birth weight babies who are at greater risk of disease and death. In countries where malaria is endemic, some 20 to 40% of babies are born with low birth weight, on average of 469 grams, lower than the average one in a study. Anemic mothers, not surprisingly, produce low birth weight babies. Eradicate malaria from a population where it is endemic, and the percentage of high-risk births will plummet. The family planner suggests that their anti-pregnancy efforts, by reducing the total number of births, also reduce number of low birth weight babies. Once again, as in the case of maternal mortality, they advantageously lay claim to the side effect, an unintended consequence, really, of their main program. A direct approach would be far more efficacious. Dramatically improve the health of African mothers by freeing them of the cure of malaria, and you will dramatically improve the health of their babies. Finally, there is a clear relationship between malaria and miscarriage. Anemic mothers miscarry roughly a third of their pregnancies. Malaria thus operates as a population control mechanism by directly reducing the birth rates. Given the massive numbers of deaths from malaria, one would think that its eradication would have consistently been a top priority of U.S. foreign aid. Not so. The rapidly falling line in Figure 6.1 represents USAID's faltering commitment to the fight against malaria, from $50 million in 1985 to a mere $10 million in 1994. This money has disappeared as a result of shifting priorities, chief among them population control. Compare the $10 million spent on malaria in 1994 to the over $400 million spent on fertility reduction programs that same year. Given this disproportion, the kindest word I could think of under the circumstances, it is not surprising that many Africans have grown cynical about America's purposes. Quote, "Malaria keeps Africa down," one African leader told Shell, and goes on to say, "and that is where the world wants us to be," end quote. Others were even more frank, declaring that population control, not disease control, is USAID's central mission in Africa. Listen to Dr. Stephen Karanja, an obstetrician/gynecologist and past secretary of Kenya Medical Association. Quote, "USAID has targeted Kenya for depopulation at the expense of the integral development of its people." So that's disturbing, right, guys? I didn't even finish this section. I will get to that in a part 2, actually.